The Ending, a dialogue between a man and his creator, by Marcel Cooper. Chapter 1. The Writer. Stan Avery walked alone down an empty, desolate street. The midnight silence was undisturbed by his footsteps, the noise of which were absorbed by the rain-soaked asphalt. The streetlights that illuminated his path, placed symmetrically on either side of the street, cast their light only on the road and the few parked or abandoned cars that rested on the curb. The sidewalks and buildings beyond were enveloped in darkness, hidden from Stan's vision as much as hidden from his mind. His focus was forward, on the street's dead end, which the lights did not yet reveal, but that he knew was coming. It had been 7 years since he had been down that road, to the building on the dead-end street. Just knowing that that building would soon be in sight was enough to get Stan's heart pumping harder with every step he took closer to it. That pumping irritated the bullet wound in his chest. The pain thrust his mind back to the previous night, the night he had gotten that wound and which now brought him to a place he never wanted to visit again. It had been 7 years since Stan had resigned his position as a homicide detective with the Mayhill City Police Department, a promising career he had given up because his superiors would not allow him to hunt the ghost. The criminal, whose real name was unknown, had been responsible for the deaths of over 60 people in the last decade. That included Amelia Lionheart Avery, Stan's wife. He didn't blame the department for keeping him away from the ghost's many crimes. A conflict of interest was a conflict of interest. However, he could not stay either. As a private investigator, Stan had spent the years since the death of his wife solving case after case, inching ever closer to putting the ghost behind bars. Stan's pace quickened as his destination came into view. The building permeated the darkness as if intentionally revealing itself at the perfect moment. It cast its shadow upon Stan, taunting him with the horrid memories hidden in the darkness that seemed to ooze from its broken windows. The place had been abandoned since Amelia was left inside and stabbed 30 times, once for every year of the ghost's prison sentence the first time Stan caught him. It had been 7 grueling years, and Stan and his partner, Pierce, had finally cornered the ghost. They had tracked him to a safe house on the outskirts of the city. All of their intel told them he would be there, and he would never see them coming. Stan had no idea who it was that had tipped the ghost off, but the safe house was empty when he arrived. There was no furniture, drug paraphernalia, or any sign the place had ever been lived in. He had been 2 steps ahead of them. Again. The next thing Stan knew, Pierce was wrapping his arms around him, throwing him aside as a crack sounded in the distance. The sound had come just after the bullet that produced it, a .40 caliber round that had gone right through Pierce's back and into Stan's chest. Both men hit the ground. The distance the sniper's bullet traveled, plus plowing through Pierce's flesh, had slowed its momentum enough that the bullet was lodged in Stan's chest, just below his shoulder. He was bleeding badly, but he knew he would live. Pierce, on the other hand, had taken the full force of the shot he'd somehow known was coming. He was laid out in front of Stan, the exit wound in his chest large enough to see through. His lips quivered, blood slipping out of them as he struggled to speak. "I had to," were his last words. As he walked down the silent street, the freshly stitched wound throbbed. He ignored it. It wasn't the first time he'd been shot. It wasn't even the second. It wasn't even the 5th. That didn't make him any less lucky to be alive after the ghost got the drop on him. Pierce hadn't been so lucky. That's why Stan was making his slow walk down a damp street, and Pierce was in the morgue. "I'm going to put an end to this, Pierce," Stan thought. "All I need is 5 minutes. There were no sirens yet, but Lisa, his contact at the department, would know where to find him once she discovered he'd left the hospital without checking out. The cops would come to back him up. By the time they got there, they'd be placing him under arrest. Stan stepped up on the curb as a lonely compact car whizzed by him. Warehouse 816 towered over him. Just being there put a knot in his stomach. His long-delayed visit to the warehouse was prompted by a note he'd received on his dinner tray at the hospital. Warehouse 816. It ends tonight. It does end tonight, Stan growled in the solemn darkness. He slipped the revolver from his hip holster and walked through the battered front door. Once inside, Stan sucked in a sharp gasp and almost dropped his gun. The warehouse was nothing like he remembered it before or after its abandonment. There were no old boxes, support beams, or even a concrete floor. Its size had decreased impossibly. The multi-story building was now only one small room, whitewashed from ceiling to floor. "You're here," a disembodied voice cut through the silence. Stan pivoted to his left, instinctively pointing his gun at whoever was in the room with him. He hadn't noticed the man sitting at a white writing table. Stan couldn't see his face, only a head of short black hair and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. The guy was hunched over, penning words into a spiral notebook. He didn't look up from the table, even with a deadly weapon trained on him. Maybe he didn't notice. "I bet you're wondering what's going on," said the writer. "Where's the ghost?" Stan demanded. "I don't have time for games." The writer kept on writing. "This isn't a game, Stan. You'll have your epic final confrontation with the ghost soon enough, but I need to talk to you first." Stan pulled the hammer back on his revolver. Whoever this guy was, he had to be working for the ghost. He had probably been put there to get Stan to lower his guard. That was a trick he would never fall for again, not after the ghost blackmailed Stan's old high school sweetheart into reeling him into a relationship, only to have her literally stick a knife in his back. Had Pierce not been suspicious of her and staked out across the street from her house that night, Stan probably would not have survived. The writer chuckled. "What's so funny?" Stan asked. "You think I'm playing with you? I remember when Lolita stabbed you. That was in Book 3, Spectral Desire. It was the first time I thought about killing you off. I didn't have the heart." "What?" "Sorry about Pierce, by the way. He was one of my favorites, but sometimes moving the plot forward requires desperate measures. God knows you wouldn't be here if he hadn't died." "All right, you." Stan stormed up to the writing table, pulling a veil of anger over the terror that welled in the pit of his stomach. No one knew about what had happened with Lolita. Not even the ghost had all the details. And this guy claimed to have had something to do with Pierce's death. Was he there when the ghost shot him? Stan shoved his gun at the writer's head, but the guy kept on writing. "Tell me who you are, or I swear I'll paint that wall with your brains." "You're not going to shoot me," said the writer. "Yeah?" Stan went to pull the hammer back, but he'd already done it. "If you knew anything about me, you wouldn't be so sure." "On the contrary," the writer said wryly, "I know you better than you know yourself. And I know you're not going to shoot me because it doesn't follow the plot." "You think I care about your plot?" The writer paused. He took a second to peer up at the barrel of Stan's gun, then continued writing. "You don't understand," he said. "There's no easy way to explain this, so I'll just come out and say it. I created you, Stan. You're a character in a series of crime thriller novels, The Ghost Chronicles. The series tells the story of you, Stan Avery, and your attempts to catch the ghost, the killer who murdered your wife. In each novel, you're faced with a new murder case that you and your partner, Pierce Underwood, have to solve. Somehow, the cases always lead you to the ghost. You end up solving the case and saving the day, but your nemesis always gets away. Is any of this ringing a bell?" Stan didn't respond. Of course what he'd said was true, but none of the information was anything one of his closest friends or worst enemies wouldn't know. Since Stan didn't know this guy, the writer's knowledge only proved he was working for the ghost. Just the thought of it was enough for Stan to entertain the idea of blowing him out of that chair, but that wasn't his style. He wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger if need be, but never in cold blood. Besides, this man was probably the only person who knew where to find the ghost. All his other known associates were behind bars. "Look," Stan said, "you picked a real bad day to screw around with me. Whatever this is, I'm not buying it, so tell me where the ghost is." The writer kept writing. "I don't know where he is, but I won't stop you if you want to look for him." Stan spat on the floor. The wad didn't make a sound. "I'm warning you. Try anything and I'll put one right in your face." The writer didn't as much as look up in response. Stan turned and headed toward the door, but soon realized he was headed in the wrong direction. Maybe this book character business was getting to him more than he wanted to admit. He turned to his left, but that was the wrong direction too. He spun around and stared at the opposite wall. It was a blank white square, like all the others. There was nothing all around him but white walls and a writing table. The door had disappeared. Stan whipped his revolver back out and pointed it at the writer. His hand shook so violently he had to grip the gun with all his might to keep from dropping it. "Who are you?" Stan demanded with the forcefulness his police training called for. "What is this? What happened to the door?" "Do you believe me now?" asked the writer. "How did you do that? Answer me!" He held up his pen. "What do you think I've been writing all this time?" Stan tried to get a look at the writing. He was too far from the desk to make it out, and he dared not take another step closer to the man. It was a trick. It had to be. Stan took a deep breath and gathered his thoughts. It was just a mind game. The ghost did things like this all the time. He was trying to freak him out and throw him off his game. Really? The writer raised his eyebrows but kept his eyes on his work. Okay, if this is a mind game, then how would I know that you stole your father's Luger when you were in the 10th grade? You were going to shoot James Carson, the kid who used to bully you, but you got scared and put the gun back before your dad got home. Stan stopped breathing. I've never told anyone about that. I know. It was the only time you were ever afraid to fire a gun. The writer smiled. I just made that up, by the way. 15 seconds ago, that event had never happened. Now it's one of your deepest secrets, and James Carson is now a real person. That's what we writers call retroactive continuity, or retcon for short. It was a lie. Stan remembered that kid that bullied him in high school. He remembered taking his dad's pistol. There was no way this guy just made that up. It had happened over 25 years ago. Come on, Stan, said the writer. Is it really that hard to believe? That huge warehouse you remember is just a small room. The door you came in is gone. I know your history because I made it up and continue to make it up as we speak. I'm the invisible hand behind your life and everything in it. In the back of your mind, you've always known the crazy coincidences that happen to you aren't just random chance. I've been guiding you since day one, and I don't know if you've realized this, but I even know what you're thinking. It was crazy. Impossible. Right now you're thinking this is crazy and impossible. Shut up, Stan screamed. If you're telling the truth, then what are you doing here? That's the question. I'm here for the same reason you are. Remember the note on your dinner tray? It ends tonight. Stan echoed the words. So it was you who sent the note. The writer shrugged. Yes and no. The ghost sent the note, but he's a character just like you and everyone else in this world. You got that note because I meant for you to get it. I wanted you to come here because I need your help. What do you need my help with? He asked. The writer paused his activity and leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together behind his head. I need help with the ending, he said. The ending of what? Of this. He indicated the nothingness around them. The end of the story. I've been at this for 9 years. All the action, the emotion, all of the ups, downs, and in between. I've thought about ending it so many times, but after every book, a new idea came. There were new avenues to explore, new mysteries to be solved. I just couldn't get enough, and neither could my readers. To be honest, I've fallen in love with this world and its characters, including you. I love it so much that now that I've exhausted every possible scenario, I have no idea how to end this. I stopped writing when you walked into Warehouse 816, and this manuscript has been sitting in my desk drawer for a year. Today, I picked it back up and decided I'd write myself into the story for one reason and one reason only, to give you the choice. The writer slid open a drawer to his left and withdrew a second notebook, then handed it to Stan. Stan looked at the writer, wondering if this guy was serious. He didn't seem to be joking, or even setting up any kind of test the way the ghost usually would. He just sat there, writing. They continued, Stan standing and the writer writing, for an uncomfortable minute or so. Finally, the writer spoke up again, though he kept his eyes on the notebook. You can leave now. I'm not going anywhere, Stan said. Your boss killed my partner, and unless you want to join him. The writer picked up his notebook and left the desk, rolling his eyes as if Stan was no more than an annoying distraction. He pushed against the white wall and a door opened to another room, which was apparently also completely whitewashed. Stan rushed after him, shouting commands to stop. He couldn't catch up before the writer closed the door behind him. It was not a full second later that Stan burst through the door and stumbled out onto the street outside of Warehouse 816. He looked back, gun in hand, but was indeed right back outside. The rickety door of the condemned warehouse stood wide open, so Stan could see that the interior had transformed back into the unkempt stone structure it had always been. What was that? Some kind of dream? An out-of-body experience? The ghost was no stranger to mind games, but neither he nor anyone else Stan knew of was capable of illusions that elaborate. He exhaled and remembered the very real bullet wound smoldering in his chest. It seemed this was the beginning of whatever the ghost intended to be the end of their struggle. Bring it on, then, Stan said, staring up at the warehouse. I'm going to find you and bring you down. He turned to walk away from the warehouse and nearly tripped over something that was laying at his feet. He looked down and saw the notebook the writer had given him on the ground in front of him. On it was a yellow sticky note that read, "Whenever you're ready to get started, the sooner the better." Hilarious. The very idea that the writer or the ghost believed he would play into whatever he was planning only pissed Stan off more. But he did pick up the notebook. In his experience, things like that tended to come in handy. Hey, Marcel here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And thanks for listening to the first chapter of my novel, The Ending, a dialogue between a man and his creator. Now, if you like this video, then like this video so I can know that you like this video. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week when Stan comes home to find an uninvited guest in his apartment. If you don't feel like waiting a week between chapters, this book is available on Amazon.com and my website, writingcooper.com. But even if you get the book, come back anyway so you can hear it read in my silky smooth voice. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you next week.